Yes, as I was introduced by Chris, my name is Duisters. I'm a security consultant at Secura, and I mainly focus on things like red teaming, but also ICS SCADA, and a lot of interesting things to do. What I would like to talk to you about today is, first off, I would like to have a small introduction about red teaming, how we perceive it. I think it's going to be hard to follow up on the story of Neil, which was very good. And afterwards, after the small introduction, the changes in the threat landscape. Ralph mentioned stuff about that as well. The threat landscape and the actors that are relevant. Red teaming in practice, how we actually perceive and execute these exercises, and our small part of red teaming as a whole. And after that, hopefully, we still have some time for questions. So I think after the talk of Ralph, you probably all know this logo, and I'm sure you all still remember what Ralph had to say about it. Just as a small recap, in 2016, there was a hack of the central bank in Bangladesh, where $81 million was stolen. Due to a digital attack, basically. What happened is an attacker was able to send actually it was able to send approximately 24 payment requests into the SWIFT network from that bank to transmit funds from that bank towards other ones. Approximately 4 actually went through, and where the payment was completely processed, and $81 million were exfiltrated. It could have been almost $1 billion if every single one of these payments was actually processed completely. In this case, luckily for the bank in Bangladesh, that didn't happen, because the attackers made a small mistake. In the 5th payment that they tried to do, they made a small typo. They mistyped foundation as foundation, and a bank that was routing these financial transactions actually noticed, Deutsche Bank in this case, and they got curious to see what was going on and stopped the other transactions from that. What's interesting about this one as well is that this attack was related to the Lazarus group, which is a quite famous group of attackers that is related to North Korea. They're also famous for the WannaCry attacks and the hack of Sony in 2014, I think. And the motive is mainly financial or political. What about this one? This can be an interesting one. Nice picture. The Dragonfly group. What we have seen is that this group targets specific organizations in critical infrastructure in America up until this point. Both staging and directly towards the intended target. And what I mean with that is, I think Neil also mentioned it, sometimes this group actually attacks organizations that are not that direct target. For example, what they have done in the past, they have attacked an organization that is actually used to get new personnel in critical infrastructure, a recruitment organization, and manipulate the resumes that these organizations send to organizations in critical infrastructure, insert a piece of malware in that, and by using that attack, being able to actually get into the critical infrastructure and the organizations that are in there. What's really interesting about this as well is that once they have obtained an access to these organizations in a critical infrastructure, they only seem to gather information up until this point. So what their exact motive is, probably obtaining a strategic foothold to use something in the future to be able to have some sort of leverage, but it is still, because they haven't really revealed their actual goals yet, it's still unknown what it actually is. Also interesting, the US CERT related this attack to the Russian government. So, changes in the threat landscape. I think it's really visible that the consequences of the digital attacks is increasing, both on a financial level, direct and indirect. For example, direct, and I mean with that is that money is directly stolen, like from the bank in Bangladesh, or indirect, for example, where an attacker focuses on stealing intellectual property. And also on the physical domain. Well, I think like the attacks, for example, like the ones employed by the Dragonfly group, I think it's really visible that attackers can have a really strict goal to obtain a foothold, a strategic foothold inside an organization. And from that, well, that can be like the Dragonfly group, organizations in energy, in water supply, and all of that stuff. So also the gain increases for attackers. So how can we protect against these attacks? Over the years, I think numerous of technical and procedural measures have been developed, implemented in our organizations to protect against attacks, right? Like security products, like the one on the screen, which is a firewall. You can also think about IDS systems. We have penetration tests that are happening to see if somebody can hack into our environment. We have security awareness programs to train our users. Well, we have certificates like the ISO 1, physical security assessments. We have detection capability, a SOC, for example, and so on. But the real question is, how well do our security measures hold up in practice? Do we really know? And I think there's only one way to really find out. Well, that's the hard way, like for example the organizations that were hacked, and that's the way that you can use by testing in practice to see how well everything holds up if an attacker actually attacks you. And what's also interesting to think about is that companies are very dynamic, and also the attack surface of companies is very dynamic as well. Often, from a security perspective, well, Secura and Medicine Gurk has always been a very technical organization, so we like to focus on the technical security measures. But what's also interesting to note, for example, is that other changes inside an organization can also be really relevant for the security as a whole. For example, the security assumptions that are being made in an organization can completely change when, for example, an event is organized. When the doors are open, then a public event is inside your company. Is it then still the case that an attacker cannot obtain access to your network outlets? Or is it then, well, potentially greater risk? So I think, and I also think on a connection level, every sort of interaction creates some sort of attack surface. If people communicate with each other, both internal and external, if you know that, for example, a lot of people in human resources communicate with a recruitment agency, and if that recruitment agency is actually hacked, what would happen to your company? Would that have an influence? So it's much more complicated than it would seem. And this is really where I think red teaming comes in. So what is red teaming? I think Neil explained it very well. It is a simulated attack. It is, well, it has its origins in military, and it's all about learning weaknesses, learning how well you actually detect these things and how well you can actually mitigate these attacks. Yes, from our perspective, we are the red team. We always have a specific objective that we communicate with our customer, that we define in conjunction with our customer. That can be our goal. And the goal can be, well, for example, can you gain access to my internal network, and can you get some sort of payment, or can you steal money from our organization? Can you send in a payment to the SWIFT network to exfiltrate money from us? Well, not like the hacks that have happened in practice. Usually we are only well allowed to do 1 cent, but it's still interesting. I think from our perspective, we take the role of the attacker. And I think it's kind of a special role for us because I think it's not just a job for us. I think it's more like a passion, maybe even an obsession that people have. I know a nice story. We were still talking about it yesterday about somebody who has spent like 4 or 5 hours hiding in a closet somewhere when they were doing an attack because they had some sort of network access there. And well, it could have been really, really interesting to see where you can get. So we were just in the closet doing that testing, and afterwards, when everything was clear, we just moved out. So it's much more than just doing your day job, and at 5 you just leave, and that's it. So I think these are the domains that Neil talked about as well. The human field on the on that side, the digital one, and the physical one. And what red teaming is, well, from our perspective, we are usually focused on the technical side of things, but during red teaming, we are focusing on the broader scope. Because usually what you see is that the combination of these things can be really powerful and can result in, well, in the most unknown vulnerabilities that have not been identified before. So, which actors should you protect yourself against? It's kind of an open question. How do you know as an organization which threat actors are actually relevant? Do you really have to protect yourself against groups like the Dragonfly group that may, for example, be related to the Russian government and have a much higher level of skill than other ones? Is that really relevant? I think what's really important in that case is to take a look at threat intelligence. And for example, the Tiber program of the Dutch National Bank, which is the threat intel-based ethical red teaming program, they use threat intelligence to define which threats are actually applicable to an organization or to an industry. And based on that, they define the red teaming scope. And also, the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center provides guidance for certain industries to see which, and they provide information about which threats are actually applicable. So, which threat actors do they define? The professional criminals, one. The state-level actors, and both the Dragonfly group and the Lazarus group that we talked about earlier, I think both of these are kind of in these two categories. Next to that, the terrorists, hacktivists, cyber vandals, internal actors, private organizations, those are all defined. And each of these actors has a different goal, a different skill level, and a different way of working, basically. For example, if you compare the following two, actors that are only interested in stealing money, basically, you can imagine that these actors have a very much different way of working than actors that are really interested in gaining a persistent foothold on your network, to persistently exfiltrate information. Because once you start stealing money, it becomes, well, it's very hard to keep that a secret if you want to steal $1 billion. So that's a very different way of working. And also the skill level is highly different. You can imagine that a script kiddie, for example, has a very different skill level than, for example, a state-level actor like organizations potentially associated with the Russians. Yes, so finally, red teaming. This is where, from our side, our game of chess begins. This is our chain of attack that we use during our red teaming exercises. And what's important to note, although it is listed as these steps are sequential after one another, but I think in fact these are more like feedback loops. For example, if we perform a certain attack during our exploitation phase, it could be that attack results in new information that feeds back into the same process, and that allows us to have a new attack. So to very quickly walk through it, the reconnaissance phase, planning, that's always important for us to identify when are we going to start with these attacks, because it's really important to perform these exercises in a well-defined way and in an ethical way. Once we have identified all the code of conducts, the way of workings, we start to move to the reconnaissance phase, where we actually start obtaining information. And I will get into that in a minute. Exploitation, that's when we try to get a foothold, when we try to get the first initial infection into a network. And basically, once we have that, once an attacker has access to your network, well, you can do all sorts of stuff, right? You can start looking around, seeing what's what, seeing if you can elevate his privilege more, and actually obtain his goal. And after the goal has been obtained, and if the goal is related to information, often it's going to be the case that this information will be exfiltrated. And as the last step, from our perspective, is actually closing the red teaming assignment in an ethical way, removing all the traces, making sure there are no vulnerabilities introduced, all traces of malware are being removed, and actually getting into the process of actually learning. Because what's really important is that we do these exercises to learn, to gain knowledge, right? And that's what happens in the last step. Like I mentioned, information is key to a successful red teaming assignment. So, what kind of information are we looking for? Well, you can sort of think about, well, on the person level, on the personal domain, information about key personnel departments, connections between people, people that handle untrusted information. Basically, we are looking for everything that could be useful for us during an attack. On a digital level, for example, well, what does the attack surface really look like? Is it really like for example, the case where Neil mentioned that maybe there is some information on a website of another organization that allows you to get everything that you want? And also for us, well, things like workstation configurations. What kind of systems does this organization actually use? Network persistence. Where are the network connections? Wi-Fi. Can I access and hack your Wi-Fi network from across the street? Is that possible? We have seen that happening. On a physical level, physical security. How strict is it? And is it everywhere? And how is it at different locations of the same organization? I can imagine, and we have seen this in the past, that often the headquarters is really well guarded. But what about other buildings of the same company? Maybe they have maybe the physical security is not that strict over there. Maybe I can just walk in, plug in my laptop somewhere in the wall, and that's it. And I can just start trying to exfiltrate a lot of information from that network connection. What's also interesting, like I mentioned, public events. Are there any events where a lot of untrusted people are allowed into the organization? And also, yeah, for example, like public conference rooms. I think what's a nice one is me and a colleague, we spent several days working in a public conference room. We just walked past the security, said good morning, you have to be nice, of course, and went into a public conference room that actually had network connections over there and used those network connections. We stayed several days over there. We had a persistent connection in the network from one of these network connections that was present there. And by working several days, we just, after that, we just walked out. We had obtained all the information that we needed. We had obtained access to the crown jewels. And after that, after we've had that, we just walked back out. Is that possible? Sometimes you don't really have to have access to to the core of an internal network to actually do this, or to the core of an internal organization. So what are the methods? Well, open source intelligence, active reconnaissance, scanning for information, actually probing, human intelligence. Sometimes it's better if you have to have certain information to just ask for it. Maybe if you frame it in a nice way, maybe you can get a lot of information that you would never be able to find online. And also on the physical reconnaissance. By not walking around the company, by not looking around, well, we never would have identified, we never would have found that conference rooms were open and that you had network connections in there, and that you could just, by performing an attack on the network admission control over there to gain access to the network. We never would have found that if we didn't go there to visit. So this is where it mainly gets interesting from my point of view, the exploitation phase. That's what I really like. This is the phase where we try to get access to the system, to the network, to the organization. This is really where we try to find the weakest link. So this is in the first step. This is about creating and deploying attacks. Which attacks have the highest likelihood of success, and which attacks, well, are the most interesting for an attacker because, for example, they have the lowest risk of detection. Also, those attacks are often, well, the most interesting for an attacker because you do not want, well, you do not want an attack that is very noisy because that might be detected, that can easily be detected, and that could get the organization into a high alert mode, right? So, what could you do? For example, you could, well, as Neil mentioned, often the human is a factor in there, a combination between the human and technique. So what we often do is, for example, we would leverage some sort of social engineering scenario to get access, to try to get access to workstations that are in there. So what we often have, we try to create sock puppet accounts to create trust. And after that, to use those to pretext attacks.
Sorry to interrupt. Mm-hmm. Ladies and gentlemen, you're here present at a session on red teaming. You're learning here to think like an attacker. During these sessions, an attack took place. Anyone noticed it? Anyone paid attention to it? What happened? There you go. Please, or you shut up.
Yeah, I saw Roy put his nice devices there on the other stand. I thought I saw an Arduino or something else coming by.
It's not an Arduino. It's just my Wi-Fi thingy.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe that is to communicate.
Anyone else paid attention and saw what actually happened? Or just dozing off, twittering and stuff? Then I just throw it randomly. You, over there. What might have happened during this talk?
Didn't see anything.
No?
No.
Let me rewind. Yes, please throw. When I came on stage, what happened? Yeah. Yes, finally somebody paid attention. What happened?
It's nice and bright red.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So what could you do? I'm a host. This was my laptop. This guy shows up, slightly too late, says, oh, I have a final adjustment to my presentation. Can I please put it in your laptop? Of course I say yes, because the show must go on, right? So what else could he have done? Anyone? The techies. Here you go. Change passwords.
Well, you could detect passwords and key locks and everything on it. So,
yep.
And gained access to your hard drive, everything.
Very well.
Because it's very nice red one, which is also available on the internet.
Yes, of course, of course. Why may I, you know, I'm just a host, independent host, I do this stuff all the time. Why may I be interested as a target?
Because you're going to plug your laptop and other stuff.
Very well.
And you're also probably also on every program everywhere else in the world. So you would be a very nice offering for contacting things and things like that.
Yes.
And gain Wi-Fi access on every access point in the world that you're hooking up to.
Yeah.
And your cell phone maybe, probably, with contacts.
If you own me, you own my clients.
Right.
And there are some very interesting folks in there. Thank you very much. Throw it to me.
You're welcome.
So for me, this was a known known. Unknown to you as an unknown. I hope you know now, because mostly at conferences, I always have to educate people, whose laptop is this? Sometimes it's the laptop of the secretary, the office manager, or the director himself. And you have access from them you get access to the whole company and their clients and stuff. Please don't do that. Use a presentation laptop only, or make a different account, or best, you just mandatory say you need to email your PowerPoint the day beforehand, because this we're not going to do anymore. And my laptop does it as a USB entry. So, Roy, what have you done in the meanwhile while you've hacked me? Please demonstrate.
Well, yeah, what's interesting to show, actually, what would have been my first scenario is to sort of take a screenshot or take a webcam shot or something to show which laptop it actually is. But in the meantime, what has happened in this case is that, yes, this system got infected with a small piece of malware. In this case, in the background, you will see that I have a interpreter connection, which is a connection between this system and my system that allows me to execute commands. During a real red teaming exercise, we wouldn't use a well-known interpreter connection, because we would use our own, Secura malware kit for that. But I think this is very visible, because it really allows you to very easily take control over this system, and you have a lot of modules to allow you to see what's actually going on this system. Well, for example, this is the directory of the documents that Chris has on his system. And you can see, for example, there's a presentation in there. That could have been the one from Neil. I don't know. There's a KeyPass database in there. Oh, that's interesting. And based on that, after this initial infection, we can start to look around. We can start to look around if you can elevate your privileges. Well, for example, maybe Chris has applications, maybe he has credentials saved in his browser. Maybe I could use those to gain access to a lot of accounts and to elevate my privileges from there. And then in a corporation, you often see that credentials are reused for different systems, right? If you have an AD environment, a lot of systems are usually, access is provided with the same user accounts. So if I have access to this system over here, perhaps I can just download caches. I can download the caches of Internet Explorer and Chrome in this case, and I can just extract the stored credentials from there and use those further up in my attack. So that's a real quick example. And also, what I would like to show you is an attack that is really common in practice. It was misused a lot in last year, and this is an abuse of the Office DDE attack. It's a functionality that is being used in Office to share information between applications, and you can leverage that as an attacker by, for example, sending an Excel file that contains this attack, and the user that opens it, like for example this one, it's interesting. A user might open this, and if this is leveraged as a specific targeted social engineering attack, people could open it, right? What would happen if they open it? You get this message. The workbook contains links to one or more external sources. It could be unsaved. Well, if you want to update the sources, click Update. Okay, we'll do that. And afterwards, remote data is not accessible, but would you want to start this application? If you click Yes, in this case, and if you can, get the user to actually perform these actions for you, you will get an infection. Very similar to the one that has happened over here. In this case, this attack is incredibly simple, because what it just does, it just has a cell in the Excel sheet that contains this command. It's just starting Excel, starting CMD, the command line, starting PowerShell, and then downloading a certain script that is executed on the system, and that allows me as an attacker to obtain control over the system. About abusing weak physical access security. Often people think about our most secure location, but not so much about other locations, like for example if you take your laptop to a conference. So, post-exploitation, managing, maintaining, and elevating access. This is really when an attacker starts moving towards the goal. First, the step is to make make the access as persistent as possible, because you would probably, maybe some of you noticed when during the talk of Neil that I was sitting there and I was typing on my laptop to see if I could get this thing to be stable, because right now it's not very stable. And if I lose this connection, for example, if I unplug my Wi-Fi thingy over here, that's it. So I need some sort of persistence as an attacker to make sure that I can regain this control that I have. And after that, hopefully that allows me to elevate our privileges and to move around the network, move around other systems that Chris might have access to, really, well, going for the goal of the assignment. Exfiltrating, I think that sort of speaks for itself. From our point of view, it's really important to do this in an ethical way. For example, if we have the goal to obtain access to highly confidential information, maybe it's not that wise to exfiltrate all the information. Maybe it's just enough to get a screenshot of an application and show that you have access without actually getting all the details in there. Clean closure, reporting, removing access and attack leftovers, and of course the blue team evaluation. And what's important to consider here as well is that an improperly executed red teaming attack can cause serious harm. For example, if you have a phishing attack and that you send out to an organization, it might be an amazing phishing attack, but you are dealing with people and with real organizations and real consequences. So that means if a phishing attack, and it has happened in the Netherlands, luckily not at Secura, but it has happened that a phishing attack has gone wrong, and that it totally went out of control, and that it leaked to the media, and it got a lot of reputation damage because of it. So it's really important to keep the red teaming attack under control. Code of conducts are really important, rules of engagement, just to make sure that everything is being done in an ethical way and that it stays within the limits of the law. Privacy is important. The thing is, criminals don't abide by the law or by ethic, but we do. We have to be better than the attacker. You may ask, well, how does this work with certain scenarios? For example, people could just bribe somebody in my organization, right? Well, how would you do that? How would you test that? Would it not be possible? Well, in those cases, it's always possible to simulate an attack like that. For example, by having a certain leg-up scenario, by just simulating that we have access and that we are the, well, bribed employee. So, to conclude, what do we learn from it? You can use red teaming to test the security of an organization in real life, to see how everything that is interconnected actually holds up. Can a threat actor obtain their goal? Well, like Neil mentioned, learning about the unknown unknowns, identifying the most important vulnerabilities, and that allows you to act upon that. And furthermore, to improve the detection capability to mitigate these unknown attack vectors. It's not just about the attacks that can be targeted at your organization right now, but it is also about the attacks of tomorrow. If you know how to detect these, and you know which key steps are being taken, which patterns occur in these attacks, you can also recognize perhaps attacks in, patterns in attacks that are yet to come. And ultimately, to be able to act upon an attack before it is too late. So, any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Roy. Well, at least you got everybody to switch their phones off. That's really an achievement. Thanks for hacking me. I hope you learned something that you know, this is very basics, you know. Please don't do that anymore. USB sticks on conferences. So, thank you very much for the technical side on red teaming and hacking me. You gave a splendid story on the history, the present and the future of red teaming. Any questions for these two gentlemen on red teaming?